out to them as well. So this is our second webinar. So welcome everyone. Our second webinar for All4Inclusion. So from July onwards, they will be sponsored, and we are getting some sponsors in to have a look at them. But sort of for this one, I've spoken to a charity called Tourette's Action, and I will be putting a link to a virtual bucket collection in the chat later, and that will be for another event that I'll be doing shortly as well. So there are captions available. So if people do want to see the transcript as people are speaking, the captions are available. And also, we're still waiting on Nana to come, who is our last speaker. So hopefully, fingers crossed, he will be here as well. If not, we will have a little bit longer on the Q&A section, and I might be able to bore people's ears off for a little bit as well. So just to introduce the guests that we've got speaking, we've got Richard Beaven. Richard, I invited Richard in. I've worked for the same business as Richard. Richard was in the senior management of the business I've been in. So I've seen and also been part of seeing how Richard changes culture within a business to become more inclusive from top to bottom. So that's why I've asked Richard to speak as well. Carly Tait. Carly's represented Team GB in Rio, and from looking at her and speaking with Carly over the last 6 months or so, maybe a little bit longer, I know she's extremely knowledgeable on the disability and inclusion topic. So looking forward to Carly speaking as well. And then hopefully Nana will be popping in. Nana Saeed Marfo. Nana's a TEDx speaker, and he is just an extremely inspirational character. So fingers crossed he will be in. I have dropped him a quick message. So last time we did this, I had a bit of an issue with my internet connection, which is great when you're hosting something like this. And I put everyone on mute, and my connection dropped. And then when we was changing speakers, it was hard to get the second speaker in, which we just about managed to do. So I'm not going to put everyone on mute today, but if you can mute yourselves, and then what that will do is that will allow, if there are any issues, which touch wood there aren't, at least then we can roll on anyway. So without further ado, no one really wants to hear me speak, but they would like to hear Richard speak. So I'll hand over to our first speaker, Richard Beaven.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and I'm really pleased to be invited, and I was surprised and pleased when I got the invite from Scott saying, would I do this? And I was thinking, why me? What have I got to bring to this party? And then reflected on it and thought, actually, probably a few things that might be worth thinking about. I've been very lucky in my career to have had the responsibility for leadership of very large organizations and small organizations. I've had an amazing career. It's all been in financial services, banking, and insurance. And thank you again to Scott for saying that changing cultures is what it's all about. And I have passionately believed that for all of my career. I've only worked in one organization, I would say, in my whole life of 40 years of career that was genuinely inclusive on every single front you can imagine. And that was a company called Reuters that became Thomson Reuters. And Reuters was just inclusive at its heart. I can't tell you why, no one knew, but you felt it from the day you joined to the day you left. And I was with some colleagues who I haven't worked with for 15 years the other night, and we said, isn't it amazing? None of us have ever worked anywhere like that. And I give you an example of, the sort of things that happen naturally in that business. When I joined and said to my potential boss that I was, he said, do you have anything about you that's different or unusual? I said, well, yeah, I've got 4 kids and my partner's name is James. And he didn't blink. He didn't say anything other than, that's great to hear. We are a really inclusive organization. We don't care about anyone. We just want everybody to be who they are here at work. That wasn't last year. That was 15 years ago. And today, I think few companies would ever even start with a conversation like that. So we have a long way to go. A few thoughts on, so what do I mean by trying to be an inclusive leadership and change cultures? Insurance, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of working in it, is generally about 30 years behind most businesses in terms of where it is in terms of all strands of diversity. And I was talking with Scott earlier and saying, when you think about, hasn't it made good progress? Generally, I'm glass half full, and I think it has made a lot of progress. And then I see appalling things like my friend Amanda Blanc, who's the CEO at Aviva, an enormous insurance company. She was hosting her annual general meeting in London 2 weeks ago, and was receiving misogynistic abuse from blokes in the audience about the fact that the balance of their board was now more female than male, and therefore wasn't a jolly good job because there's lots of people now to do the cleaning up, and other appalling comments against a woman who has generated more shareholder value than the 3 blokes who ran the business before her. You sort of kind of think, what do you have to do as a woman in business to be given an equal, inclusive right when you have people like that in the audience? Just, I hope that he has children and grandchildren that would have seen that and said, it's unacceptable. And I do think it's a lot about changing cultures, and cultures for me start at the top. It really, you can't really change a company culture from the middle. And I think lots of people try and do that because often in the middle of businesses, people find it very frustrating and want to do things and come up against all sorts of barriers, because the real reason the culture is there is the tone is set at the top. And I've always wanted to be in a business that was going to be welcoming of me as a gay dad with 4 kids, and so that I could be myself at work. And I want everybody that worked in any business I work for to feel exactly the same, whatever challenge they have. And I've been particularly vociferous around LGBT, partly because of me, partly because I saw how difficult it was for LGBT, particularly trans people, to be themselves at work, and have wanted to do that. But I've been a huge sponsor, of women in the workplace, because again, I've seen, how difficult it has been over the years, particularly insurance, for women to progress. Very, very talented people who are simply being oppressed by less talented blokes who are holding them down for one reason or another. That was just unacceptable. So I've done a lot in that. Culture change takes a very long time. And I think a few things that businesses should be doing across the board to help that have worked for me. One is tone of the top, and that tone is how you behave, what you do, how you act, and what you do when something goes wrong, when someone says the unacceptable, when someone tells you that they have been mistreated at work for one reason or another. And that's the thing that I think most people remember. They remember what you did or how you made you feel. And I think that is something that I've tried, certainly with myself and for colleagues I've worked with on exec teams, to think about that. And why we've done a lot in terms of how do we educate ourselves and how do we educate other people. When I was at Lloyds Banking Group, we had a system of reverse mentoring, and across all different strands of difference, each of the senior execs had a particular strand that they focused on, whether it be disability, whether it be LGBT, whether it be women, whether it be anything that needed a greater understanding, ethnicity, whatever. And that helps because we all need educating, and we don't understand, and we can pretend that we do, but we don't. So we all had, mandated, but we want to do it anyhow, a need to go and have a group of people who represented whichever strand you were looking at to come and talk to them. And then on one-to-one basis, we had 360-degree feedback. So we had people that sat in front of us and said, I think you're not doing a great job in terms of X, Y, and Z. And it was in a private session, but it was really good. So it could be someone right at the front line talking to the CEO, giving them some feedback about what they'd observed and what they've seen. And that was a really, it's challenging to hear at times, but very good thing to do. We spent a lot of time in listening groups, and what we tended to do, I think this was back in my Swinton days, for example, we spent a lot of time bringing people of difference together, rather than saying, let's focus on our strand. Let's bring people with lots of differences together and have a collective conversation about how we can make life better for everyone. So, and what we found often was that many of the points that one strand needed, so did another. And that was helpful. And then we found the cross conversation really, really inspirational and helpful, so that it just helped us be better as an organization. So I think that's helpful. I think probably another thing, and I said to Scott earlier, when I was thinking about what have I done specifically, in sort of disability area, and I guess forgetting that I used to run the retail branch network for Barclays, and one of the most thrilling things I was involved in was the redevelopment of ATMs. And you think about it now, you think about ATMs that are at different levels, they are braille enabled, all sorts of things. But actually the first one we built, and there was a company called Siemens Nixdorf in Germany who built the ATMs for Barclays. And we worked tirelessly with disabled people to help us redesign ATMs. So the ones that you've seen now often that are lower level, that have braille, that then had better screens, that had all sorts of things, we designed them with Siemens Nixdorf. We took customers and colleagues with various different disabilities to help us design them. And they are the ones that, they are the fathers, if you like, of the ones that are out there now. So thoroughly enjoyed doing that. And again, back to learning something, my God, did I learn a lot from thinking about how you design an ATM for someone in a wheelchair or someone who's blind or partially sighted or whatever it may be. It was a great thing. So I kind of finished with, for me, this is about having conversations. I am passionate about making sure that everybody, whatever their ability, is treated with compassion and can bring themselves to work and can be themselves, with no one being unpleasant or unkind or to them. And my final point is, every business that I've ever worked in and every business out there is looking for great talent. And great talent comes in all shapes and sizes and forms and whatever. And when I'm talking about this in terms of LGBT inclusion, if you start excluding people that you don't think fit, then you're just chopping out a whole area of talent. And one of my team at Brightside in my last business was profoundly deaf, and he was one of the best project managers I ever had. The best thing that ever happened to him was when we installed Teams, because he didn't sit in meeting rooms full of people talking over each other. He could hear the conversation because it was more one-on-one, and he said it was the best thing ever. So my best project manager became even better because he could actually join in and be better part of a conversation. So what a talented person. That probably in some organizations say, well, how could you have a deaf project manager? It must be really difficult. No, it wasn't. He was absolutely amazing and got even better because some technology helped him be even better. So that was kind of my starters for 10.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. So just so I know, because we've had a few people kind of late in, just to explain, I used Eventbrite to set up the Zoom for the first time, and it's put on a passcode, but it hasn't told me or anyone what the passcode is. So I will be doing it the long-winded and manual way, sort of moving forwards. Also, just I've put a link in the chat, and I'll do so in a minute. May the 15th to June the 16th is Tourette's Awareness Month, and I'm doing this webinar with our friends at a charity called Tourette's Action, and there is a virtual bucket collection in the chat box. Just a couple of things that they've posted recently. They've spoken to some children, and they've given some quotes directly from the children for people to read. So this is from one girl who is about 8 years old. Some of my tics make me choke when I eat. I get so scared it makes me not want to eat. And then another one that I've got here is I struggle to go to school most days because of my tics and anxiety. And I think we sometimes don't realize how different conditions can have a ripple effect and knock on to things like mental health, mental well-being, and something that we all take for granted, just like eating. So I'm going to move on and introduce our next speaker now, Carly Tait. Just before Carly starts speaking, if anyone does want to put any questions in the chat box, I can ask them to Richard, Carly, and fingers crossed Nana, who has messaged me, will be here as well. So, Carly, if I come to you, please.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for just saying that little snippet about that little girl. Like, literally, that makes my heart break. Like, all these things that you don't ever think of, and as a disabled person you have so much to learn about other individuals, and I wouldn't necessarily know that about Tourette's, so that is insightful. And I think that fostering of an inclusive culture, very much what Richard said, for me it comes from an awareness of difference, because difference isn't a bad thing, and we shy away from labels, and really they're just to be embraced completely. And I think as senior leaders can understand that difference is only going to enhance a business, then that would be just a much better first step than what I potentially have experienced as somebody in business. So I'll give you a little bit of background. I have struggled in my sort of almost 20 years of being in the workforce. I have struggled to progress and develop. A lot of my development has come from being has been self-served in a way. So I, as a disabled person, am inherently ambitious, hardworking, and all of those types of characteristics that you do often find with disabled people. And I don't want to be stereotypical, but a lot of that does come from the barriers that are put in our way to integrate into the workforce properly. So I have always grown up with a very successful father in insurance, actually, who has been the CEO of many insurance organisations. He currently works for Hiscox as Chief Underwriting Officer. So my dad has always been that person where I'm like, oh, that's some like hefty shoes to follow. And he never really implemented the tools for me to do that, because at the time when I was born, sort of early 80s, there wasn't really that resource behind how do we help a disabled person. And when I was young, the narrative was very much just do what you can and work harder than anybody else, and hopefully you'll level that playing field for yourself. So it was all about me adapting to my surroundings as a minority rather than the other way around. So when I entered the workforce, there was no inclusive culture really in my industry. So I work in marketing. Marketing as an industry is a bit unforgiving, you know, it's relentless. I love marketing. Marketing was that first touch point in my life where I thought, oh, I can do this, because I learned something at school that was very loosely linked to marketing, and I grabbed hold of it because it was the first aspect or the first situation where I felt I could do something. And so I thought to myself, well, I'm going to run with this because I'm good at it. And that's what I did. I went to university and I went into a career. But the tenacity, I should say, and the pace and the intensity of marketing doesn't actually leave room for a lot of inclusion, and brands at the moment are understanding that we do need to be more inclusive, but that inclusive lens is still very much an external output rather than the internal effort. So when I got to around 27, I was still at quite a low level in my career, given that I had already been out of university for 7 years. There wasn't really that much progression. I was held back a lot. I would put on performance plans for no reason. I couldn't keep up with some of my peers, or I couldn't attend certain meetings because they were off-site with no parking. There was no provision made for the fact that I needed closed captions or anything like that. So I was constantly battling. And as a disabled person who is extremely ambitious, because I feel like I've got something to prove, I watched the 2012 Olympics and on the TV, and it was my first experience of representation. And as somebody who was just working, going home, partying at the weekends, that was all my life was. And then I saw it on the TV, and I saw it on the billboards, and I saw these disabled athletes doing amazing things. And yes, there was a bit of narrative around disability, but for the first time in my life, as much as it might have been glamorized, it was my first positive representation of disability. And it was enough to say to me, as a person who didn't think they could do anything in sport, it was enough for me to go to London, to become a spectator and to watch it. And when I came back from the closing ceremony, I decided I'm going to be in Rio. I'm going to get there. I'm going to become a wheelchair racer. Never in my life had I even sat in a wheelchair in a sport capacity. For me, it was a very sort of medical tool. And I put my life on hold, and I put my career on hold for 5 years. I still had to work in marketing because brand didn't support para athletes at that time. So I didn't have the means to stop working. So I had to do both alongside each other. Then in just the year before Rio, I managed to secure paid sponsorship, which allowed me to become a professional athlete and go straight into full-time racing. Then I went back into the workplace, and the differences between having an almost protected, elevated status as a disabled person, being an acceptable disabled person, and going back into the workforce and struggling with the same issues really impacted me. That was compounded by the fact that I got pregnant. And when I got pregnant, people assumed that it was okay to ask me really invasive questions about how I even got pregnant or how I was going to have the baby. And this was in a workplace setting. This is not uncommon for me. I have been asked in a workplace setting if I have intimate relations and things like this. So it's really your bodily autonomy goes out the window as a disabled person. And when I went on maternity leave, I actually went into a bit of a, I'm going to say I was very depressed. I was very isolated, and I really struggled because I felt that people were judging me as a disabled mum. So when I returned back into the workforce, you can see some patterns here. I keep dipping in and out of the workforce. So when I went back to my marketing role, I decided enough is enough. I cannot live in the medical world of disability anymore, because I had enough about me and enough understanding of my circumstances that I understood that disability is a social construct. And so I decided to make a change, and I went into EDI. So I was still working in marketing, but I set up a colleague network, and it went from one person, which was me, to 500 colleagues in the space of a year at a very well-known corporate organisation. That spearheaded my career. That's where the development came, because all of a sudden people made provisions, and I was able to be myself, and I was able to say, this isn't right. These systemic attitudes to, you know, is it hard to employ a disabled person? They are true attitudes that people do have, but I just faced into it. currently I am still working in marketing. I still love it. But recently I have been carving out an EDI career path. So hopefully if you connect with me on LinkedIn, you might see some changes in the very near future, which is going to be very much EDI led. So that's what I'm hoping for. And I think really the lived experience of my intersectionality, not just as a disabled person, but as a woman, as a caregiver, you know, having a child, that intersectionality has really made me an advocate for other people, and that's where the impact is. So yeah, I'm really happy to attend this panel, so thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Carly. And yeah, I think what you can see, both Carly and Richard have different experiences, but very similar messages in the fact that we need to be open, need to start having conversations and looking at ways to move things forward. So what I'll start doing in a moment is sort of taking questions. There is a raise hand function which is in the reactions tab at the bottom. So if you highlight there, you can raise your hand, and then I can take a question there, and we can ask those questions to Richard, Carly, or both. Also, if you want to put a question in the chat, feel free to do so, and I'm happy to read the question out for anyone who might have too much background noise or maybe be a little shy of speaking, and hopefully we still are likely hopefully to get Nana come in near the end. He has just messaged me again, so fingers crossed he's just stuck in traffic. So before we take any questions, or before I ask any questions, just another message from Tourette's Action. This is from a young boy who says, "My tics constantly give me headaches and pain in my neck. It doesn't matter how much it hurts. They just don't stop." And then I think there is another one here. Since being diagnosed, I've never seen anyone who specializes in Tourette's. At the moment, I attend a Huntington's rehab hospital, which also deals with head injuries, and all I get offered is medication. And that's from a man. So Horana's put in the chat, Carly's mentioned needing captions. Carly, are you deaf as well as in a wheelchair?
I feel like I've got a plethora of medical issues at the moment. So I was born 10 weeks early, and that manifested itself in a stroke-like way. So I had a brain trauma at birth, and that brain trauma left me with cerebral palsy. And a lot of people with cerebral palsy have secondary conditions or related conditions to do with CP. And for me, mine is my hearing impairment. So the difference with CP is that it's actually, as much as it is a physical manifestation, it's actually a neurological disability, because it's a brain injury. So what that means is my messages don't get sent from my brain to parts of my body very well. It gets jumbled up. So imagine that you have a very linear process from your brain to whatever you want to move, and those messages go from A to B to C. My messages go all over the show. They go like A, then they might move to M, then we'll flip over to R, and then the output of that is a really wobbly walk. My ears are also impacted, so the messages from my brain don't get sent to my ear, and my ear can't send them properly. So I have perfect ears, apparently. Physically, they just don't work. So yeah, I have an impairment that I have often tried to mask. I think masking is a very big skill that disabled people can have. I feel like the queen of masking sometimes, in that I try and hide my impairment. Not so much anymore, which is obviously why I do this panel and things. But yeah, captions are just a lifesaver. Honestly, I only discovered them when I was 10, and when I found them, I think I was watching like Neighbours or something, a soap, and 888 on the TV came up. I don't know, and we all decided, oh, what is this 888 thing? And it was subtitles, and I was like, oh my goodness. And then I realized that as a person that needs captions, just how hard it is to keep up with people, but also to absorb information. So I just feel like no wonder I went all the way through school behind, because I didn't have that one-to-one support, and I just had to catch up a lot, you know?
Excellent, thank you. And Juana's put, masking is exhausting. I'm profoundly deaf myself and have been from birth. And I think, you know, masking happens with all sorts of disabilities. You know, it's quite common that people associate it with neurodiverse conditions, but it can be any condition there. Hannah said, I remember 888 was always on my telly, and I don't have a hearing impairment. And as soon as you said it, it resonated with me as well. And our webinar in August is all about understanding masking as well. Richard, whilst we've not got any other questions in, I'm going to ask a question to you, if that's okay. So what, out of the businesses that you've been in, what's been the biggest culture change that you've made, and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I'd probably say when I joined Swinton Insurance, it was the business needing the most radical culture change. There was, back to my point about it being led from the top, there was a very aggressive management team, all male, and the rewards that had been put in place for the management team that preceded us were eye-wateringly rich-making, which led to appalling behaviours across the whole business. First and foremost, towards customers, because people saw these telephone numbers of riches and decided, well, it didn't really matter what you did with your customers, we'll just abuse them. They then piled in enormous incentive schemes into staff who lost the plot on we're here for customers, and therefore, you know, played the game. And then overlaying that, the reward went to seemingly to those who were the most aggressive or most loose and fast and loose with the rules, and that behavior was reinforced. And as I'm sure you've all seen, and we've all been in cultures where, you know, I'm afraid to say, very laddie, very misogynistic, very kind of unpleasant cultures exist, and this did in spade loads, and that there appeared to be no limit on what people got up to and what they didn't get criticized for. And I heard and saw things that frankly made my hair curl, and only when you start to make those changes do people start to realize that you're serious about a culture being different. And when you start to fire people for totally inappropriate behavior, do people then realize that you're not giving lip service to this, you absolutely mean it. And to give you an example, and this was truly awful. We had a Muslim member of staff who we'd made workplace adjustments for to deal with, you know, what he required, absolutely rightly so, for his religion and being able to pray and have time to do that and all those sorts of things. And you know, we had gone a long way to make sure that we did the best we could in the premises that we had and all those sorts of things. You can't always make it perfect. So we had done that and accommodated what he needed. I then got a call one day from this contact center head who said, "We've got a major issue at work. Could you come over?" And this guy was sitting in a room. There was a girl sitting in another room, a white girl who was dating a non-Muslim girl who was dating a Muslim man, and this Muslim man at work basically abused her publicly about the fact that she was dating a Muslim man. It's not right. It's not. This shouldn't happen, and it was vile. And he did it very publicly. I mean, it shouldn't be done full stop. He did it also very publicly. Upset this young lady, and it was truly appalling. And I went over to see, sat in a room with him, the same guy I had sat with not very long before, talking about how do I make adjustments for you. And I said, one question, did you do it? Yes, it's disgusting that she's dating a Muslim sort of thing. I fired him on the spot, and I said, we've talked a lot about being inclusive and making sure that everybody, whatever they come from, whoever they are, bring themselves to work and without fear or favor or anybody getting in the way. You've asked me to do that for you, and I've done it, but you can't afford that same right to one of your colleagues. And I said, and you've admitted it in front of me. So this is gross misconduct. I've been judge and jury, and you're gone. And I'll happily see you in court if that's what you want to do with me. But I'm setting down the marker that that's not acceptable behavior. And you know what? That was probably the single biggest moment of change in the organization, because people actually could see right there and then that was it. I mean, obviously we positioned it properly. It was suspension and yada, yada, yada. I mean, you have to do the right thing, but the guy never came back for obvious reasons. And, that kind of set the tone, and it sounds very dramatic, but I think not calling out, unacceptable behaviors means that culture will never change, because people think they can get away with it. And when you reward those that only make the sales numbers and go about it in any which way, do whatever they want to do, play fast and loose with the rules, then you just continue to keep that culture that you're trying to change. So, I love this topic, because it's really hard to do, but I think when you see it change, and perhaps I'll finish this with, when you see one of the best moments ever in my career is when I used to talk about, I've always been openly gay since I came out, talk about it at work, and talk about the fact that, if ever there's anyone feeling that they just needed someone to talk to, they don't want to come out at work, but whatever, then I was always someone that was willing to be an ear. And the guy called me who was trans man. I had no idea. He said, "You're the first person I've ever told at work ever, because I'm so terrified of being abused." He said, I don't want you to share it with anyone. I want to just tell you, because this is the only place I've ever worked where I feel safe. And I said, well, that's absolutely amazing. It made me feel absolutely fantastic, but only because that's what he did. The best bit was when about 6 months later, we were doing a town hall with all staff. And he said, I'd like to take this opportunity to come out to the entire company and tell them about my story. And this is a guy that had never been out at work. And it was absolutely amazing. I mean, it's slightly choking me up talking about it now, but when I could see him being able to be himself at work, talk about his partner, talk about, and what he then did brilliantly was to talk about, I was listening to Carly's comments about people asking intrusive questions, about, her life and her, and things that should never be asked. And he said exactly the same thing. People coming up to him saying, well, what surgery have you had? Completely unacceptable questions. But what he did was to turn them all around and say, look, let me tell you the things that I find absolutely unacceptable. Here's the list, 10 things, but I'm happy to talk about all of this. So it was also educational. So I think when you create that culture and people feel able to be themselves in whatever it is, then you have a much better place. And his colleagues at work had no issues whatsoever. He loved it and became one of our best performing team members in our Southampton business. So I think culture is so important, and how you behave is so important, and that for me is a heartwarming story that I shall never forget, because how it impacted his life and also mine.
Excellent, thank you, Richard. Nana has now joined us, but before I come to Nana, just to give him a little bit of time, because he has been in a rush to get here today, so just so he can just relax a little bit before coming on, I'll ask Carly a question. So Dan's put in the chat, I've had invasive questions in work before, so I can improvise with Carly on this. I was told I should give up work at one point. EDI sounds brilliant. Is it a widespread thing? So Carly, if you can answer that the best you can.
Yeah, I've literally just put a comment in the chat. So EDI, and sometimes you hear it as DEI. I think it just changes depending on what organisation you're talking to. But EDI stands for equity, diversity and inclusion. It can also stand for equality, diversity and inclusion, but it's changing to equity because equality is historically about giving everyone the same opportunity or the same delivering a solution in the same way, but often people don't need the same support. They need differing levels of support to provide that equity, if that makes sense. So it's not really about giving everyone the same thing. So EDI is very much an emerging role within people functions. I would probably go as far to say that the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter, that has spearheaded a lot of the movement around EDI. I think businesses are so much more accountable than they ever have been in the past. So not just accountable in terms of a legislation point of view, which is obviously very important. So it is mandatory for UK businesses to report their gender pay gap, for example, but there will become a time when there needs to be more reporting. So ethnicity is probably the next one that will come down the line. And then ultimately, because people will buy into more appropriately, more ethically invested brands, that's just how those attitudes are now changing. So I think knowing that it's crucial for commercial sustainability to have a diverse workforce, but also to enable diverse people to work together with an inclusive culture, because D&I are two separate things. That is what is sort of triggering this sort of fresh wave of EDI positions in businesses, and it makes it so exciting. So, I mean, I don't want to say too much, I don't want to jinx anything, but hopefully if I do manage to sort of move a bit more into that field, it's literally like my lived experience will have brought me down that path, and that's what makes it so exciting, because it isn't actually about, okay, so how many years experience have you got in X, Y, and Z? Now it's actually based on the characteristics of who you are as a person, what skills are transferable, and, you know, how can you make an impact? And that's just so exciting for me to be sort of measured on that, on those types of scales, rather than, you know, physicality outputs, which it often is in marketing. You know, can you attend this shoot? No, because it's in London, and London is notoriously inaccessible, so I'll have to count myself out of that shoot. But yeah, no, it's new and exciting, definitely.
Excellent, thank you, Carly. Nana, I'll come to you for your talk now, if that's okay. Thank you very much for getting through the traffic and not giving up and for joining us today.
My pleasure. So where do I begin? Okay, so firstly, my name is Nana. I was born 6 months premature with a narrow airway, live and breathe through a tracheostomy tube. And I think my journey literally began when I was born. Going through the SEND system was difficult enough. As we all know, when it comes to young people being called disabled, when I was growing up in the 90s, everything was based around the medical model. So it's, how can we fix Nana? How can we make sure he's better than what he was when he was born? Went through most of my life with people trying to fix me. Conversations being had about me and me not being able to, take part, or conversations being had with me there, and my opinions didn't really count for much because my voice wasn't really heard. I then went into employment, and that's where I actually realized I was different. I actually realized I was different when I was a kid, and someone pointed out, hey, you sound different, you talk different, you breathe different. So I was like, okay. So I was like every other kid, but that wasn't the case. That's when I established the tracheostomy tube. I didn't know what that was. And I think at the time, bless my parents, they didn't understand how to describe or tell me about my indifference. I knew I had lots of visits to Great Ormond Street, and I would get a lolly at the end of it, which was fun. But I still didn't resonate that, right, there's something wrong with me medically. So going into the world of work, I wanted to work like everybody else. And I think people kept on telling me, oh, you've got a trachea. You don't need to work. Get DLA. If you're all right, you don't need to work. Someone of your condition doesn't really work. And I never really understood why every 6 months when I went to my hospital appointments, my consultant would be like, so what do you do with yourself now? I work. And their mouths would drop open. Like, I'm thinking, why are they shocked? Someone with a trachea doesn't work. I'm like, okay, I've got a trachea and I work. I don't want someone to give me a handout. My brain functions perfectly. Lucky for me, my brain didn't get starved of oxygen. So why can't I work? Why can't I go out there and make a difference like everybody else? I managed to get a job within the civil service, gave them 10 years of my life. And it was a situation where I was very naive when I joined them. I thought being a part of them, they would help me, give me what I need, and be an employer, but that wasn't the case. One of my employers actually didn't deem me as disabled. And I only found this out when I took them to a tribunal, because I wanted reasonable adjustments to be able to maneuver and do my role as perfect as everybody else. So that was my first time having to fight as an adult, because you can imagine, through my childhood up until the age of 18, my mum had done everything. So now that the shoe was on the other foot, everything kind of linked up in my head, thinking, oh, so that's why my mum used to drag me to tribunals, because people don't understand me. People don't understand that I'm different. People don't understand that I'm not saying I'm hopelessly broken, even though the term disability to me means you're disjointed, you're not fully functioning. But at the end of the day, this is the life that I'm living, and this is the life of continuing to educate people that I can achieve. My employment life was in plain sailing. So as I said, I went to a tribunal just to get recognized to have enhancements. And then due to me doing that, and management took precedent on me and took to Twitter and called me Darth Vader because of the way I breathe, and obviously quite clearly my skin tone, because Darth Vader's black. So that was another thing that was a hiccup in the road. I was livid. It was difficult for me to digest, but the mere fact that someone within the Crown had decided to do that was flabbergasting. So that was another lesson learned for me. It made me, grow thick skin, and it made me understand that, you know what, for the rest of my life, I will continue fighting. People will not accept me as an equal. People will not look at me as an individual who can achieve. However, I am in control of my story, and I am in control of how I want to be perceived. I then moved on to another department where a line manager, for whatever reason, she disliked me. And I'd been coping. I'd used all the techniques of a complaint system. I'd done a grievance, and all she could do was use my disability as a form and a way to put me back in a pigeon box or pigeonhole. And one day I just cracked and wrote a blog and described my experience in the working world. And as you may be aware, working for the Crown, you're sworn to secrecy. You cannot divulge whatever happens in the workplace. Well, I didn't know I was that important anyway. I got dismissed due to that because apparently I'd spoken to the press, which I thought, wow, so I'm that important to the Queen that working as a civil servant and speaking out, I get dismissed for it. Now, anybody else would have been dejected, would have thought my life is over. I've probably lost my 10 years worth of pension. I've probably, there's going to be a big fat hole in my pension payments at some point. And let me just get back, claim the benefits. But that wasn't me. I decided to speak about inclusion, speak about having a disability, looking at the figures of disabled people within employment. At the time, it was 46.3 compared to 80% of able-bodied people in the workplace. And I thought to myself, wow, look at the figure of amount of people who have disabilities, who can work, but society doesn't allow them to because employers don't seem to understand how to include them. I then started to do little Facebook Lives, which led on for me being on a BBC radio talk show, talking about employment rights, talking about employment inclusion, talking about just being a Black man with a disability and the struggles I've been through. It then led on to me being an ambassador for Scope, where I was going into schools and talking to young people about looking at disabled people as anybody else, giving them the due respect that they need, understanding that a disability is just a different way of a person's life. It's a different direction, but we all get to the same destination. It's like you being on the road, a fast car drives past you, only for you to catch up with the car at the traffic lights. It's a similar process. So that was a good experience for me to ascertain and achieve. I then got catapulted and nominated for National Diversity Awards, which I didn't win on the night, but the mere fact that I got to meet famous people, I thought, yay, that's my achievement. Meeting famous people that I watch on Coronation Street, EastEnders, that was wonderful. That was a good thing. Since then, I've written a couple of articles for The Independent, talking about disability, talking about Black History Month, talking about statistically how disabled people can be supported and can thrive if there is support. And I've written about myself in terms of living with a tracheostomy, almost losing my voice permanently and using my voice to make change and to make waves in terms that as disabled people, we have a voice, we want to be heard, we want to be seen. And the only way to do that is to be present, to be seen, and to be heard. You really have to speak up to be heard. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nana. So I'll come back to the Q&A. So Juana's just put Luke isn't here today. No, Luke will be joining another webinar in the future. And Nana's, who I was hoping to have on another webinar, has come in to stand in for Luke. So so Nana was very short notice on this one. I was going to be asking Nana for 1 in 2 months' time. So so thank you for that, Nana. Right, so we are slightly over time, so I'm just going to be really quick. So I know there was a couple of questions that people did have. So Sandra, you did have a question, I think, for Carly. Do you want to ask that?
Yeah, so today, so just to give you a bit of background, Carly, I'm a wheelchair user and I've only been a wheelchair user for 4 years. And I lost my job because my employer would not make reasonable adjustments. And so they made me redundant, basically, because they didn't want to do anything. And it became my fault, not their fault, that they weren't making the adjustments.
Yeah.
So that became difficult. But just going on, that was 4 years ago. And I think with EDI, we have come a long way. But I'll give you an example. Today, I've been speaking to a lot of people. I don't really work for myself. I do a lot of things online, and I tend to do a lot of things where I'm always putting things out about what we should be doing, what we are doing. But I'm very passionate about some things like housing, accessible housing, and obviously workplace, and getting more people back into work that have a disability or have never worked, because there's quite a lot of us that are self-employed or never been employed since we've had a disability or just never worked. Yeah. So my question to you is, the new buzzwords seem to be around EDI and EDI officers and EDI this and EDI that. But in my experience over the last few months, since I've been sort of putting things out there and talking to different people in the industry, is that there are still a lot of companies out there that are employing people to do EDI who don't have a greater understanding, who don't go to people with lived experiences. And I feel, my personal view is, they're just ticking the box. So my question to you is, how do you think we're going to progress and get more people involved with EDI if the companies themselves don't employ people with lived experience? Because I feel a lot of people in the post have no understanding of what it's like to have, even with a hidden disability or physical disability or from whatever background, they don't seem to have bigger concepts.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from. So EDI is really new as a role, and because it's new, they've had to take that talent from the existing workforce and the existing people function. So typically EDI has come out of maybe having a D&I champion or a D&I lead in a business who has pursued a route for EDI to progress. Businesses are ultimately going to become more accountable. They know that it's great for commercial sustainability and they know that they have to invest in it. So by not having lived experience, or even, lived experience through family members, for example, and it's really important to understand that EDI isn't excluding other people. So inclusion is everybody, but inclusion does have to have marginalised groups at the core, at the centre of it. So having somebody that doesn't have a disability in an EDI role is not necessarily a bad thing, but they have to have the skills to be able to align to other communities and understand and listen. So I think if businesses and organisations can foster inclusive culture by really honing in on the skills of, things like listening, being perceptive, solutionizing, solving problems, allowing colleagues to feed into the processes, that's where they'll make the most success. So when I was at the role that I'm not in now, but the role that I was in prior, I set up the network because it was a grassroots transformation, because it was lacking. So there was no disabled community, so I felt like the only one. And that can't be right when you've got an organisation full of 70,000 employees. How can you feel like the only disabled person when that just simply isn't true? So when I set that network up, I kind of went in as a bit of a bulldozer, and I infiltrated the D&I team, and I said, you're not putting the things in place that we need to put in place. And when I put a business case behind it and said, actually, look at the sheer amount of ACAS settlements you have to pay out because you are not serving disabled people, they almost had no choice but to take it seriously. And they did, they took it seriously, and it's a legacy now because I'm no longer there. But yeah, they definitely have to think about the characteristics of, if you don't fill that role with a marginalised person or somebody that has an understanding, then they have to have those transferable skills to be able to bring the colleague into the heart of what they do.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for the question, Sandra, and Carly as well. And then just a final question for Richard. This is from Leah. What is the biggest drive for a business to embark on a culture change in your work experience? Which I think is another great question.
Where do you start? I'm really fed up, for example, of having to remake the business case for the 10 millionth time in my life for LGBT inclusion. That if they don't get it now, when are they going to get it? I am sick and tired of trying to make a case for talented women to progress through organizations, and listen to blokes at C-suite saying it's really difficult to hire talent when there's no black person on the board, there's no woman on the board, there's no senior women in the organization, there's no obvious disabled talent, etc., etc., etc. It's just nonsense. So why do you want to change the culture? You can point to many organizations that outperform others because they have got a really successful track record of being inclusive, and that both diversity and inclusion for me go together. You want diversity of thinking. Back to my Reuters days. Why was that such fun organization? Because not one person in any meeting I was ever at came from the same country. We are all from different countries. It was just, and therefore you had a diversity of thinking, a much more interesting conversation. No group think because everybody thought differently. And I think people of difference bring different thinking to the norm, and therefore that's why businesses are more successful. And it's not about me banging on about it. You look at indices that are now being produced and look at the way the investment community is thinking about investing in businesses. They are starting to realize that those businesses that can truly demonstrate greater inclusion across the whole gamut are more successful, empirically more successful than those that don't. And then you've got the regulator in this country, in my case, the FCA, being very pointy towards the insurance industry about how much progress they've got to make on D&I and fast. So I think it is not just the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do if you're a business with shareholders, want to make money. You can take it away from being an emotional argument for those that just worry about numbers, and then then make sure the right thing is done. And if the only way they can believe it is see it in numbers, then fine. That's the way to do it. And Scott, if I've got 1 minute, I just want to pick up on this point about there was a lot of comment about working from home. When in my last business we had 555 people, we had every single one of them working from home within a month of deciding to do it, and we decided at the end of that we were never going to reopen the offices. And I think one of the things that, and I mentioned my one project manager colleague, and one thing that struck me, and forgive me for everyone on the call, how many people on this call are in wheelchairs, but actually I have no idea, because actually you can't see. So actually there is no difference. So I think working from home has opened up a huge difference of opportunity for people to be more flexible because of a disability, to be more flexible because they're a working mum, to be more flexible in the career that they want. And that in itself, and certainly my last business, brought talent back to the business that had to leave because of all sorts of reasons. We maybe could have made all the adjustments we should have done. People just didn't want the journey. It was too difficult or too expensive. And then all of a sudden, we could find ways of accommodating a working mum who could just give us 2 hours a day. That was absolutely fine. She didn't have to drive an hour. She just got on a call like this and spoke to customers. So I think the working from home bit, again, another point of culture, is about allowing people to have the flexibility that they need, because I can guarantee we've got hours that we need to cover customer service, for example. Every single hour I would take someone, and therefore we can make lots and lots of adjustments. Why do we have to say to someone, come and work for us 5 days a week, 9 till 6, and you have to come in on Saturday and you've got to drive an hour each way each day? That doesn't need to happen anymore. So I do think that is part of the culture, and I'm a huge fan of working from home and or a flexible balance of office and being at home.
No, I agree. I think working from home is something that a lot of people need to take more seriously, and yeah, I think it's going to be a hot topic for the next year or two, definitely. So I won't go through any more. I don't think there are any more questions now anyway. Kayla, I know you put one in for Richard, but I think Richard's said he was going to catch up with you about that, and I'm conscious that I don't want to keep people on too long. Nana, I'm not sure if you've read the chat. There's a lot of love in the chat for everything that you were saying in there, and everyone that's put written things in the chat, put information in the chat. Thank you, because that makes it just as much as the people sort of speaking today. But if everyone doesn't mind just bringing themselves off mute and just giving Richard, Carly and Nana a big round of applause, because they've all been amazing. So if everyone doesn't mind sort of doing that, I think I've gone a little bit early on it. Thank you very much to all three of you. We've got people here on this call today, so we're talking about inclusion. We've got people from all across the UK, as well as 2 countries outside of the UK as well, maybe 3 countries outside of the UK. So that's been amazing. Just very quickly, I'm just going to go through Nana, Richard and Carly. And if you've got just kind of one more very short snippet of information that you would just recommend to people, what would it be? So if I start with you first, Nana.
Be yourself. Don't hide your disability, because your disability is part of your identity. And don't be scared to ask questions or challenge a situation that you think will affect you in the workplace.
Excellent. Thank you, Nana. Richard?
I think mine would be to everyone on this call, help people understand, because I think it is very difficult sometimes to know what to say, what to do, and either you bumble into it accidentally, say the wrong thing inadvertently or whatever. So I think, one thing that, feel brave enough to help people learn. And I don't mean just calling out people in the wrong way. I just mean saying, help us understand who say the wrong thing. Well, sorry, but correct and help us. And when we talk about codes, and it's interesting tonight, we had a few codes used, explain them so that everybody can come along and everybody can understand. Excellent. Thank you, Richard. And finally, Carly.
Oh, under pressure now to end it on a good note. So I'm going to say about the power of allyship. So a lot of change cannot be implemented without allies. And I think where people can just make an effort to invest their time so that the burden of educational awareness isn't always on that marginalized person would be really helpful. And I think allyship is just really about being on the journey with people. It doesn't mean that it's tokenistic and that you drop in and out. It's just that you're sort of always available to understand more. And I think, by being a sort of more of an active bystander, in that space is really powerful. So I probably, 5 years ago wouldn't have called out behaviour that I see for other people, particularly working within retail where staff are abused, and just supporting staff at all levels to be who they are, but in a very sort of psychologically safe way. So calling out, in a sort of appropriate way is really useful and a key part of being an ally. So keep up everyone's good work, because each of you here today is an ally just by being here. Excellent. Thank you very much, Carly. So I'm sure you'll all agree, 3 amazing kind of things just to leave us on there. And I said lots of love for Nana. There's a lot of love for everyone for speaking today. So thank you again all very much. We've got a podcast on hidden disabilities tomorrow, so have a look out for that. And our website's now up and running. If you want to sign up to the newsletter, that will tell you about every one of these webinars that we've got coming up. The next one is on June the 14th, I think. Yeah, June the 14th, which is about why workforces shouldn't only be diverse, but neurodiverse. So thank you all very much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. And if any of you are ever in Switzerland, please give me a call.
I'm booking it. I'm coming over.
Excellent.